Hey guys, welcome back to World of Warships. Today we're taking a look at the Submarine Surveillance consumable that's been added to a few cruisers in the game. I really wish it was added to more ships because this is really the only way to counter submarines in any way other than just running away. So what does this consumable do? It's going to give us essentially a radar-like spotting of submarines within a 7-kilometer radius, which is pretty short when you compare it to something like a radar, as well as only having a 20-second uptime. So you don't have a lot of opportunity to actually get damage in on the target. So if we're comparing it to things like radar, at tier 10, what destroyers have to deal with is either 10-kilometer or 12-kilometer radars most of the time. There's a few 9-kilometer or 8.5-kilometer ones, but the common ones are going to be 10 kilometers for a lot of the American ships like Des Moines, and they're going to last like 40 seconds, 35, 40 seconds. And the Russian radars, which are that 12 kilometers, you're going to get either 20 seconds there, or I think some of them go up to around 30 or 35, depending on the ship you're using. So a lot more range and a lot longer duration for the most part. So the other thing is, destroyers also need to be spotted on the surface, right? They are a ship class that can't get to 2 kilometers away from your ship and just shotgun you. I think there's a lot of reasons that submarines are very imbalanced in this game, aren't that very fun to fight, and just overall make the gaming experience worse for everyone surrounding them. But it's a good thing we now have a consumable that allows us to deal with them, right? So here we go. Submarine is just YOLOing into our team, as he's used to doing without this radar consumable, submarine surveillance consumable. There's be no way of spotting him, and he'd just be shotgunning our team to death. Fortunately, it does let us take him down to a very low amount of HP. I do apologize if this is a very negative video. I'm going to try my best not to just complain the whole time about subs, because this is something. This is something, but you'll notice that our damage output was actually not that amazing against the submarine, especially the HE hits. The HE on the Zhao hits extremely hard. It's kind of one of the gimmicks here. It's very accurate and it's very hard against destroyers. But the damage saturation or whatever they've done to make submarines so tanky means we actually don't get that much damage out of our HE salvo there, and we're reliant on these ASW planes. At least they have given ASW planes to most ships at this tier at least. Things like Hindenburg got that this patch as well. But this submarine's still alive here. And at least we do have a flood going, so we can try and guess where he's at. But it's still very difficult. I think in comparing this submarine surveillance to radar and what just a normal destroyer at tier 10 would have to deal with, I think it's lacking. I think submarines are much easier and stronger than a lot of DDs. They can just dive underwater to get away from a lot of incoming damage, and I think they have much less to worry about when it comes to getting spotted without their knowledge, or without actually wanting to get spotted, I guess, right? A radar popping means that you're spotted whether you like it or not, right? That's kind of the rough part about DDs, and it forces them to play a little further back, play a little more cautious. And especially at tier 10, I think that's important because it's something that you should have played the game quite a long time by the time you get to tier 10, and it adds some more dynamic gameplay to the experience, allowing you to, as a surface ship or a bigger surface ship, counter some of these stealthier ships. And as for submarines, they really haven't had to deal with that. And this is a nice consumable, don't get me wrong, it's nice, but I think it needs to be either more range or longer duration or on more ships. There just needs to be something. Because alongside this change that is essentially a nerf to submarines, it's true, giving you essentially a submarine-specific radar, the submarines got buffed massively in their maneuverability, so they are now much, much harder to hit. I'm sure you guys have noticed this, but as I've been playing through this patch, I've noticed that I cannot get nearly as consistent hits on submarines than I used to, and that's including when they're using an oil spill, or they have an oil spill or whatever that actually pinpoints their location on the surface for me. The splash obviously isn't accurate and not very useful, so it's like a 3-kilometer radius or something like that that splash just randomly pops up in around where the submarine is. It's not accurate at all, unfortunately. But even against ships that have that oil spill, I just have a tougher time actually landing those consistent hits thanks to that extra maneuverability that those submarines get. So if they're able to dodge the ASW planes a lot easier now, I think we just need to add more ways for surface ships to spot them with this submarine surveillance consumable here. Overall, I do think that more ships should get it. It should be much more standardized than it is currently, and maybe even more of them than the number of radar ships that are in the game. I think it should be a little closer to a hydro. I'm not sure why we needed to make hydro not spot submarines. I mean, yeah, they spot them within 2 kilometers, sure, but I'm not sure why we needed to add a whole nother consumable when we could have just used the hydros like normal, have a 6-kilometer spot on a submarine. It would have been simpler and easier. But hey, we do, with very little damage, manage to get top score here, helping our team deal with the sub and a few of the DDs as well. So it is useful. It is a utility that a lot of these cruisers provide now, but it seems like something that we could have just added in with the hydro instead, and it would have just made a lot more sense and been a little bit easier. Less range, sure, but the duration would have been much, much bigger. And of course, submarines are at their most dangerous when they're close to you, right? Their shotgunning ability is incredibly powerful. And if you're not able to spot them as they're creeping up on your ship, well, there's not a lot of counterplay there, of course. That's not even to say about how I dislike the way the interaction is here anyway. I'm not even looking at a ship. I'm looking at a UI element here, and I'm clicking on the ocean for a plane to go drop a depth charge. Like, what is that gameplay? Okay, I'm not gonna get into it. That's fine. I didn't want to just complain. I've been complaining this whole video. That's what happens when I talk about subs or carriers. That's why I try and avoid it as much as I can. Because I do want to point out the good things in this game, because I still enjoy this game a lot, but man, subs and carriers, they just get me going, dude. It's tough. And now that we've used our submarine surveillance here, notice how we, and alongside 3 battleships, we're not actually able to take this guy out because it's just such a short duration on this consumable, and it takes a while for it to come back. So I'm leaving this in. This is kind of boring gameplay, but this is me focused on trying to kill this sub with a ship that has a hydro, that has this submarine surveillance radar thing, and has plane-based depth charges. And we don't have to deal with an enemy destroyer or cruiser or battleship pushing us and spotting us here. This is just us, open water, essentially alone against this this submarine, or at least the sub doesn't have support. We have plenty of support here, and it takes forever for us to actually catch up to him here. And notice here that our radar is 30 seconds away, so I'm deciding to push back in here a little bit more, hoping that I can catch up to him. We're also going to pop our hydro as soon as we can, because even though it doesn't really counter subs, it can help us if we just miraculously manage to sail over top of his ship at 2 kilometers. That, of course, is the spotting distance for submarines when the hydro is up. If you don't have a hydro up, well, this guy wouldn't have even been spotted at 2 kilometers, the typical assured detection range for every other ship in the game. So we do manage to get him here, but I think it would just be much more intuitive and simpler if hydros were spotting submarines at the normal range they spot ships at. I'm not sure why they needed to make it more complicated, but they did. And at least we do now have a way. Don't get me wrong, I'm happy that we have a way to spot subs at farther ranges than 2 kilometers. But it just seems like submarines are still such a very difficult target to deal with. Something that doesn't really fit with the surface ship combat that I enjoy so much in this video game. And maybe that's my own fault for not being the target demographic for this game anymore. I don't know. I've played this game since open beta, of course, back in 2015 is when I started. So the game has changed a lot since I initially played, but you know what hasn't changed all that much? The marketing for this game. Have you seen the marketing for World of Warships? I mean, you guys have probably played a lot, so it's unlikely that you've really noticed the marketing, but a lot of the marketing is all around brawling battleships, close-range encounters between surface ships. It markets itself as a close-range action game, and yet we have a very passive meta where everyone camps it out, and the major counter to submarines is to run away. So it's a little bit disappointing that we keep going in this direction with submarines, and it's been called a nerf by Wargaming. I've mentioned this in videos ever since this patch, kind of hinting at this nerf that Wargaming has said they've made to submarines as a buff, right? I've said they've buffed subs in a few different videos here this patch, even though the patch notes were saying it was a nerf. And that's because I think the upgrade to the maneuverability to submarines is so great that it essentially means this submarine surveillance radar is not enough to counteract it. It's not even neutral. I think submarines got stronger this patch, even with this addition of this submarine surveillance radar. Mostly because it just doesn't exist on very many ships, and on the ships that it does exist on, they're rather squishy, right? Playing a Yodo at closer ranges is tough. Zhao as well. Venezia can a little bit with its smoke, but still, the ships that are trying to push and engage the enemy and play a little closer range aren't these ships, aren't the ships that got this submarine surveillance, right? Even things like a Des Moines that would push up to an island, for example, near a cap, doesn't have this, where it could be a little bit more useful, that kind of thing. It's these open water cruisers that typically are playing a little further back that get this consumable. It's very odd to me. So overall, I do hope that Wargaming adds some more ways for us to counter submarines. My dream would be that carriers and subs get removed and we get to have some fun as surface ships battling it out with the good old rock, paper, scissors between destroyers, cruisers, and battleships with reasonable ways to counter each other, as well as not just outright winning that rock, paper, scissors engagement. Every time that gets brought up, it is not a strictly rock, paper, scissors engagement. There's still a lot of skill involved. Even though you have an advantage as a destroyer against a battleship, it's by no means guaranteed you win that engagement. And that's a good thing, I think. There are slight advantages, but you still need to play well and consider your positioning and where you're going, where your teammates are, what the enemy is doing to actually beat the opponent. Now, at this point, I've probably rambled long enough about the problems with submarines, at least in this video, but I'm just so disappointed that this is the direction that the game is taking. I really do enjoy this game still, and it makes me pretty sad that the direction here is not one where we're engaging more in surface ship combat, the core of this game that is so good, and that we have to add these auxiliary ships that, sure, participated historically, but this is an arcade game, right? At the end of the day, we should be focused on the gameplay elements, not the historical aspects of these ships. Even though that is a cool side and important as well to think about, I think gameplay comes first in an arcade game like this one. And unfortunately, submarines and carriers, in my opinion, just ruin a lot of the core gameplay loop that is so fun, that is that surface ship combat. But now you know my opinion on the submarine buffs that they actually called nerfs, but that I think are buffs. Let me know what you think in the comments down below about these submarine changes and, in my opinion, buffs. What do you think Wargaming is going to do next with these carriers now that they've said submarines are getting nerfed in January and January-February time, and then it's actually a buff? I'm a little worried now about what they have in store for carriers that they also said was going to nerf them a bit. Maybe that's going to be a hardcore buff as well. Kind of a terrifying thought there, unfortunately. But I think that's going to do it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. Don't worry, we're going to get on to some more fun gameplay the rest of this week and try and have some good times with World of Warships. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.